Welcome back to Saving the Republic with Joe Staten, presented by Grab Your Gear Network, where we speak to people who work hard every single day. Trades workers, merit shop workers, but really any hardworking American. We speak to you Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We bring you the news that the mainstream news is probably not talking about. So if you want to follow that, make sure you subscribe here to the channel. We also have a weekly long form podcast with Jack Windsor, the host of the Windsor Report, 98.9 FM in Columbus, and Joe Weasel that talk about the overarching topics. And again, policies that might affect your life. So be sure you subscribe to Grab Your Gear. Follow us on TikTok and Instagram as well at Grab Your Gear. Now, today's show, we're going to focus on, again, the newly elected president, Donald Trump, and some of the policies that could affect your life as a hardworking American. We talked about the Department of Government Efficiency on Wednesday's show, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that today with a special guest, Mark Rogers, joining again for the second time to the program. But also, we're going to talk about some other things that could affect your life, such as a world war, kind of an important one there. So without further ado, I'm going to bring our guest on stage, Mark Rogers, the host and founder of the Voice of College Football Network, and hardworking American, I would say, and patriot as well. So Mark, thanks for joining us again today.
Joe, it's great to be back. Good to see you. And thank you so much for the honor and the privilege to speak about these topics, because this is so important. And although the election has been won by the best side for all of Americans, there is a lot of work to do, obviously.
Yeah, maybe we can just start off with your initial thoughts on what happened in that election. You know, many in the media were pretty surprised. And I must admit, I was a little bit surprised to see, President Trump win the popular vote. And Mark, I'm not sure if you noticed this result, but there was a couple states that were closer than I expected. New Jersey, actually, if you look at the final result, was closer than Arizona. So I don't think anybody saw that coming. New Jersey swung over 10 points toward the president, but just any overarching thoughts on what happened?
Joe, I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to statistics and analytics. So I was going from election to election. I went all the way back to 1932 and was making various comparisons, just looking at the population shift of the electoral votes and where they've gone from state to state, making comparisons just during my lifetime and seeing where that shift has occurred. The fascinating portion of this, I think, is in states like California. That is obviously a foregone conclusion. It's voting liberal. It's voting Kamala, which it did. Of course, when you look at the county breakdown in states like California, Oregon, Washington, and I understand where the population is, but it brought to light, I think, even more so in this election, that if you're not living in the deep center of about 10 cities in this country, then overwhelmingly the vote is on the conservative side, and the vote was for Donald Trump. So if you're living anywhere else in America, you are interacting with people that more than likely, to a large degree, to like a 70 or 75% population voting for Donald Trump and supporting him.
Yeah, I think something that the left is really struggling with right now is the voter breakdown. You know, President Trump won Miami-Dade County in Florida for the first time since 1988. There was also a county in North Carolina, a very rural African-American heavy county that hadn't voted for Republicans since, I think, 1870. I mean, it was going back to nearly Civil War times. And so a lot of this narrative that we hear about, Republicans are racist, President Trump is racist, he's running on racist policies. Latino men voted more for Donald Trump than for Kamala Harris. This is the group that, if you listen to the news, or at least the legacy media, would tell you that, they are going to be the most affected by these supposed racist policies. And so I think we've seen a crumbling of the worldview. And Mark, I don't know if you ever watch The View with I forget Sunny, her last name, but they have had a really tough time. I don't know if you've seen that recently. Have you had a chance to check that out?
I don't watch The View, but in going through my social media and YouTube watching, which is heavy on, I'm sure, a lot of people that you would guess, there's a lot that's targeted toward The View. So I see a lot of clips that come from The View, And yes, the point that you hit on Latino males, and then the backlash against that, and the immediate response being, okay, what's wrong with them, and why were they fooled, and not the backlash or the response being, okay, what are they seeing? How are they being affected? How are they reading into this? And how are they perceiving these two candidates and their policies that spoke to them? Instead of asking that question, there's, of course, a backlash. Oh, what's wrong with this group or that group? How did they get fooled?
Yeah. And honestly, Mark, I want to ask you that we're going to get into the first topic, which is how President Trump is going to affect the economy for hardworking Americans. Very important question. But firstly, I'd like to ask you, because I can't seem to figure this out. I don't understand, what does the left run on at this point? I mean, they ran against Donald Trump, but what policies are they running on? And honestly, if you don't have an answer for that, I wouldn't hold it against you, because I really can't figure this out myself. But they ran against Donald Trump. But now that Donald Trump won the popular vote, you have to ask the question, what policies do they have left to offer? Because the left, which was once very pro free speech, is now anti free speech. They're anti gun, they're anti traditionalism, they're anti religion. We saw the statistic of 70%, I believe, of non religious voters voted for Democrats, while overwhelmingly the religious vote went to Republicans. And so we're seeing a massive shift. But just really quickly, do you have any idea, Mark? Because I can't figure it out. What does the left have left to run on? I mean, what policies can they offer to give a vision that's inspiring to Americans? I can't seem to figure that out.
Well, the last several elections, they've not run on truth claims. Well, they might be claims, but they are not truth in reality. So they have been, obviously, as you stated, name calling and setting identity politics as their staple, to really demonize the opposite side, and Donald Trump in particular. In regards to doing something that's reasonable or somewhat reasonable, I never thought in a million years that I would be going to this name for some voice of reason on the other side, and that's Bill Maher, who has disgusted me for years to listen to him argue with Christians and with conservatives. But that guy is actually a voice of reason on that side to say, what we are doing is not working, number one. Number two, it's not even reasonable. It's not good. It's not healthy. It's not reality. He has spoken against wokeism and all of the transgender policies and just all the nonsense that's going and being supported and promoted on that side. And border security, he very much sounds like, in today's world, he sounds like a moderate. He is a proclaimed liberal, and he definitely is a liberal, but that's how egregious the left has driven that end of their ticket, to where Bill Maher is being called out as siding with conservatives, and he's just being reasonable. He's still a liberal, but I think they need to find, because I do think that most likely their core is still in his camp, but they have just catered to the loud minority. I think that they have just been intimidated by the loud minority of their side.
Yeah, and I actually want to go to a tweet here from Cenk Uygur. I don't know if you know Cenk, Mark, but he hosts the Young Turks YouTube channel.
Yes.
And this is a person, if you look at this tweet here, he says, I asked Elon Musk to put me in charge of cost cutting at the Pentagon. And he said, what are your suggestions? I run the largest left-wing network online, and a Democrat leader has never asked me that question. The idea that they would take advice from a populist is disdainful. And he says, now, which side seems more open and inclusive? Which side seems more welcoming? And Donald Trump Jr. responded to Cenk, again, saying, hey, this is a great idea. If you see here, he responded to him. And so what we're seeing, we've seen Cenk's co-host, Anna Kasparian, as well, kind of go through a reformation. Jillian Michaels on the left. And it's such a massive shift, a realignment happening, where you're seeing these classically liberal ideas getting pushed to the Republican side, which maybe historically they didn't support. But to me, it seems like a common sense movement. People are realizing, hey, hold on, wait a second. If we actually cherish the Constitution of the United States, maybe we are on the right these days. And honestly, we could get into this topic more, which we need to. I want to stay on track and get to the economy. But Republicans, I don't even think a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump would support, for example, Senate Republicans, the John Thunes, the John Cornyn's, the Mitch McConnells. People don't identify with those types because these are the what you might call the uniparty Republicans. But Mark, I'll throw it to you just for a quick comment before we get into the economy side of this. Do you see that happening? Do you agree with my assessment? There a massive realignment, and if so, what do you think is drawing people toward, I guess, voting for a Donald Trump?
Well, I think people are starting to see practical situations in their own lives that are affecting them and their own families. And they are finally coming to a realization that words are important. However, harsh tweets and maybe some language that they don't necessarily find appropriate is not nearly as important as policies that are flying right in the face of just most Americans, reasonable Americans, even though I would not necessarily agree with many of them on a lot of policy regarding, of course, spiritual matters and other things, family values. They want to be safe. They want their families to be safe. They want to just have a fighting chance to work hard, to have a reasonable income, to be able to own a home, and just to live in freedom, to not be demonized for their own thoughts and beliefs, and to be able to express themselves. But I think it basically comes down to a lot of other things that we could go into, but the very top of the list is economic prosperity and opportunity, and it's security and safety. And then beyond that, it's just the notion that, and I don't necessarily, again, we won't go into a theological debate on this, but that I am a decent person, and why am I being ridiculed, demonized in this society, that I am just inherently a horrible person because of the color of my skin, and getting sexual identity and racial identity just shoved down our throats at every turn, and people just having enough of that.
I'm so elated, Mark. I couldn't tell you how happy I was to see the result of the election, partially just because of that, because people who might have fallen for that in the past, and groups who voted overwhelmingly for that ideology and for Democrats, are really starting to wake up, and such a shift is happening in the media. The mainstream media, the legacy media, is dying. MSNBC is up for sale, and it's because people watch it and they know, they see right through it. So I was elated for that part of it, but getting into the economy and how this election will result for Americans, because we've heard many on the left say, oh, Donald Trump's policies, name a policy that actually affected you. Obama created the economy that he took credit for. So I want to talk about the tangible effects of this president for Americans, something we can look at. And the first thing I want to look at is the Department of Government Efficiency, which Elon Musk, I mean, one of the greatest innovators, inventors, businessmen, arguably, probably in the history of the country, and in conjunction with Vivek Ramaswamy, which is a very impressive man on the right now, coming up the ranks, will be heading this up. And as you can see here on Twitter, at Doge, tweeted, the Pentagon can't fully account for $824 billion, $236 billion in improper payments and federal programs. $200 billion in pandemic relief went to fraud and abuse, and the U.S. failing to track $1 billion in Ukraine aid. How much do we not know about? So, Mark, I'll throw it to you. I don't know about you, but this gets me excited. The idea of Elon Musk getting in, getting knee deep in the mud and seeing like what the heck's going on with our federal budget. What do you think about that? Do you think this is going to be something that's will be a big deal for our government spending?
So I'm going to take a quick step back just to maybe reset some people people maybe on the left, if anybody comes across this that's on the other side of this, that may cause them to rethink a few things in regards to, they're going to hear a lot of alarmists out there about widespread change and the horrible things that are going to be done. Let's understand that during my lifetime, at least, Ronald Reagan was the best president and the most effective president, and he was the best president for that time. Well, Donald Trump, in many ways, superseded Ronald Reagan and needed to be more assertive, more aggressive, and needed to get to the point because of the changing times and because it called for it. And it's still, he did not complete the work, didn't have an opportunity to complete the work, and now he does. And so he needs to be bold and to be aggressive. And that's exactly what he's doing here. And I've already seen the headlines, and I've done the due diligence to actually look through the articles and not just assume, okay, this is a liberal spouting off and here's a headline that I don't agree with. No, I've taken some time to go through some of these articles that are from these alarmists about how they're going to ruin our society and fire everyone left and right in the federal government, and how this is, and just using very, on one hand, very broad strokes to paint this horrendous picture of ruining our society. And then on the other hand, taking very detailed, specific, hypothetical examples of how people could be harmed that are completely ridiculous. So let's understand, Donald Trump and his staff, they are not saviors of the world or this country, but they'll do a damn good job. And they will do a good job. They did a great job for 4 years. There's no question about that on several fronts. And even with him fighting upstream. So when I see this between Vivek and Elon Musk, I am super excited. So Joe, one of my thoughts and one of my tenets in working in corporate, I was going to say politics. It really was that. But in working in corporate America for 19 years is sometimes I don't fully have the knowledge or the information to vet out a plan myself sitting at home. But if you believe in the people and they're quality people, and I have heard enough and seen enough from these two individuals to know that they are first rate. Therefore, yes, they are going to say some things that unless we understand the context and the full plan, and they can't unveil the entire plan right now. Do they have the entire plan? I do not know, but they're already being criticized for, oh, they don't really have a plan, or this plan is going to, and then there's all these extrapolation of what it's going to be that's not necessarily the case. I just think this is nothing but a win-win situation. Will they do it perfect? Will it be flawless, executed perfectly? Will I agree or anyone agree with every finite detail of it? Probably not, although I may. Yes, we've always known that there's waste in the government. That is long, even when we trusted the government, the federal government, we knew that there was $1,000 being spent on hammers, for example, those kind of ridiculous things. We already knew that that existed, but now we deal with a deep state and corruption and waste. And the one statement that I saw from them, supposedly, I didn't see it directly from them, but I saw it in a liberal piece as a backlash against it, was demanding federal workers show up for work on location 5 days a week. And that's horrible. And how do you force people to do that? Well, I'm guessing that that's going to be more nuanced than that. But I also know from working again in corporate America, and once COVID hit, that people that work from home, even if they are hardworking, diligent, professional people, yeah, they'll do a decent job, but will they take advantage of it? Absolutely. And is more accomplished being collaborative in person? Yes, absolutely. Now, are those very broad statements? Yes, there are individual situations, circumstances, all jobs are different, that need to be diagnosed and figured out in regards to the effectiveness, because yes, you gain efficiencies from home. That is possible, but we are just going to, there is going to be such an onslaught, and it's already started from the left attacking these. But give me Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy any day to lead this. This is tremendous. This country is overtaxed, and hopefully that will be a result that will be impacted in a positive way because of this.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more with the idea of that they're talking about of forcing people to come into the office. I mean, if you care about your job, you're going to go into the office. And worst case scenario, if you do a good job, you do a great job, and Elon Musk or whoever's running this department will recognize that and say, "Hey, you're doing such a good job. We'll give you 2 days a week from home." But if you are that opposed to coming into the office, how much do you actually care about your job? That's what I take away from that. And
Would
something
this
I
been
put
a
up.
controversial topic or statement to be made 10 years ago?
No, absolutely not. No, and something I put up on the screen, I'll put it up here again. That the Doge account tweeted out, which I don't know if you are too much in tune with the cryptocurrency world, Mark, but I as somebody who is, I appreciate the reference to Dogecoin. It's Elon's been on that train forever. It's just pretty funny to see that come to a pinnacle. But they talk about only 12% of the space in DC headquarters are being used from federal agencies. And so again, why are the taxpayer dollars being sent there? And something I think we often forget that is such a critical problem that Elon Musk talks about all the time is the national debt. I mean, look at this graph. We have ballooned even since 2020 from $23 trillion to 34 trillion. And before Donald Trump won this election, Vladimir Putin and the BRICS countries with the new currency have been brazenly talking about, oh, the dollar is a dying currency. We're transitioning away from it. Putin has already changed tune on that, which is good for Americans to hear due to Trump's election. But the bottom line is that our country is racing. We're not even just heading toward. We are racing toward a cliff that if we don't get a handle on the spending, it's going to be a problem. And people don't realize, I wanted to talk about this as well. We talk about how is this going to affect people's lives. If Elon Musk and Vivek get in there and they show people, hey guys, we're spending $6.5 trillion a year on our budget. We only need to spend $3.5 to $4 trillion. We're wasting $2+ trillion that is going to potentially ruin the ability for your child to buy a home, for your child to have a secure future. These are changes, once in a generation changes. And I am so excited that we have the most brilliant minds in this country who are going to be employed to go in and figure out what's going on. And I've also been encouraged because I've seen a couple Democrat senators, to their credit, have actually come out and say, hey, I don't agree with everything Elon Musk says and his opinions on politics, but I actually would like to see what comes of this, because this has long been an issue that we've ignored. This national debt crisis, the spending crisis, the devaluing of our currency is something we can't avoid. So any final thoughts on that potential reality and any other aspects of a President Trump that will affect the economy in a good way before we get to our next topic, Mark?
And again, it won't be perfect, but my goodness, just any reasonable person that budgets their own life and a household and kind of reviews how things are done, not just from a financial standpoint, but also from a scheduling standpoint, from efficiencies of time. Is it not smart to review your own life and say, okay, we can save here, we can do this, and it can be just as fun to do this or that, or just as effective, or we'll gain this by reviewing, all those sorts, or we can gain more space in our home by reconfiguring this or hanging this up, or, just broaden that out. This is a good thing to do. Brilliant minds reviewing something that we know has been broken. And again, in a wasteful way for generations, and who knows what the corruption level has been. I'm sure it's always been there to some degree, but we know it's deep now. And this is nothing but just a brilliant move and so vastly needed.
Yeah, and I want to close off this segment by, I guess, asking a question, and also just mentioning, when we talk about the Western world, when we talk about, NATO countries, Europe, Britain, these countries that are supposed to share our Western ideas, they are very quickly heading toward a very draconian style of government, and their people are surprisingly complying. And I'm going to touch base in a few minutes on the UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer and what he's been saying about war. But also, when you take a look, Mark, at where the world stands, geopolitics, where the U.S. stands right now, we truly are. I mean, Ronald Reagan talked about us being the last best hope. We are truly the last best hope in a world where the UK is locking people up for tweets, and the police are arresting people for posts online. This is not a Western world. These are not countries who represent freedom. And so I don't know if you've seen that news, if you've been following some of the developments in Europe, but I'm going to play a clip here from Keir Starmer, and this is again on the topic of war. But I think it should be pretty alarming to our listeners and our viewers. This could very much affect your life in a negative way if our country falls in line with this way of thinking. So I'm going to play this clip here from Keir, and I'll get your thoughts, Mark.
Russia's also threatened nuclear escalation. Are you comfortable with that when people at home are watching this, worrying that you could put us at risk?
Well, it's very
Nuclear war?
important. It's very important that we're steadfast in our support for Ukraine. Russia is the aggressor,
Even
and
if
Russia
it unleashes nuclear war?
Russia has to be the one that makes the move to stop this war. It's within their gift, but we must support Ukraine. It's impacting not just Ukraine; it's impacting the rest of the world, including the UK.
Is your message to viewers back home that there will not be a nuclear war, because that is what Russia is threatening?
My message is that we need to ensure that Ukraine is put in the best possible position. This is 1,000 days of conflict, and there is a very high cost if Russian aggression is seen to pay off to do that.
So, I mean, Mark, do you have any idea what the strategy is here? I mean, what is the winning strategy against Russia? Like, I can't wrap my mind around what we're doing. And he wouldn't even address the question, which was, hey, are we going to end up in nuclear war? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, these are longstanding allies, and this would be at the top of the list historically of people that we could trust in the past. So it is alarming. I don't want to put too much on our president going forward because it's a heavy lift. But for him to get in between Ukraine and Russia and to forge some kind of ceasefire and negotiation, again, that's a lot to ask out of him. And I got to admit, Joe, I have shifted considerably on the overall topic of our involvement in the world in the last decade or so, because as Ronald Reagan did state, and you just reiterated, we are the last best hope. And I have always seen our place in a biblical sense as well as being the ones that defend the defenseless and clothe the naked and feed the hungry and so forth. And obviously those are humanitarian things that can still be achieved, but also to defend the innocent out there. And I just see that as being more and more difficult to accomplish with the complexities of some of the things shifting maybe focus to the Middle East, where you don't know who's the worst enemy here, who's the worst of the two selections. It's just a layer and layer of evil versus evil versus evil, and who do you side with? And who do you truly know in alliance with another side there? So it's a very complex situation, especially in the Middle East. And the more I become not an isolationist, but I just want us to achieve our own goals and direct our attention toward ourselves as much as possible while still being a leader in the world. And that's why I was not a proponent initially of this wave that we saw by most citizens in this country of supporting Ukraine just blindlessly from the beginning of this. I am certainly not supporting Russia's attack of Ukraine, but Ukraine has not been a free and a country that supports, human rights and values anyway. So why should we be supporting that government?
I can't even be. I don't even want to get started on the corruption in Ukraine that was globally understood before any of this went down between Russia and Ukraine. So, being in 2024, the reality is that, we all saw what happened with COVID and the pandemic, and how the level of deception that was attempted to, that certain people attempted to employ against the American people. And so I have to ask, internally, when I'm looking at the situation with NATO, these countries that are locking people up for free speech, they are largely in alignment with this, great reset ideology that we saw come forth from groups like the World Economic Forum with, you won't eat beef. Bill Gates is going to make you eat, these weird veggie burgers, and, you won't own a home. You'll be happy. Very strange globalist kind of ideas that came forth, and that these countries are largely, supporting. I mean, all the NATO countries are falling in line with these things. I just saw England is starting to put limits on who can be a farmer, right? Who can raise cows. And so very strange ideas. And it forces me to ask the question, like, should we really be fully behind, some of these countries who are governing in an antithetical way to some of our core beliefs, such as individual liberties and freedom of speech? And I don't know. I don't necessarily want to ask that question, because, we should support countries who are, favorable toward us, I think. But do you think there's a limit, Mark, where we look at some of these countries and their motives and say, kind of along the lines of what you were saying, we don't want to be isolationist, but what do we have to gain, supporting countries who are acting this way?
That's an age-old issue that many of us encounter in our own lives, whether we need to detach from something that's evil, that's unproductive, that is against reasonable human rights and values, or do we try to impact the situation? Now, fortunately, we're in a position of strength, even though we've been compromised by previous administrations. We're still in a position of strength, economically, militarily, etc., to make a decision. Do we continue in NATO and try to impact this situation and bring reason? But we're not changing other countries' cultures. That's not going to happen. We cannot impact it to that degree. But can we strong arm our way in NATO and not give up on countries that have acted reasonably and in our best interest in the past? Have they gone off the, is what we've seen on our political scene that has seemed to be lost and gone too far left for us to recover, but seemingly have in this election? Can we find that same hope in those other countries and their governments, that we can reason and pull them back to a moderate place of reason in dealing on the world stage? Or do we detach? I would opt for the latter, for us to engage and see what we can do with those relationships.
Yeah, I want to just finish up talking about this by drawing a very sharp contrast, because again, the point of the show is to explain and also to show how this administration will be so much more for the American people than the current administration. And a great example of this, Mark, is the current Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, went overseas and said that we are absolutely supporting the admission of Ukraine into NATO, which would doctrinally mean that nuclear weapons would be on the border of Russia. Now, I don't know what you think about Russia or Putin, but tell me one country who would be okay with their enemies having nuclear warheads on the border. Will the United States stand for Iran having nukes on the Mexico border? Will we allow North Korea to saddle up their weaponry on the border of Canada? No. And so, Anthony Blinken was pushing that. Now, President Trump, I don't know where he's going to stand on NATO. We've seen him in the past previously challenge NATO and their way of thinking. So I think right off the bat, just based on that takeaway, we can assume that this administration will provide for a safer world. We're going to be living in a world, Lord willing, Donald Trump makes it to Inauguration Day without a third assassination attempt. I really, I don't want to talk about that as if it's not possible, because we've seen 2 already. But I think the main takeaway here is that we will hopefully have a safer America, a safer world, a more economically sound world that we can all look forward to. So any closing remarks on that for today's show?
One of the reasons why Donald Trump may have won the popular vote was he made a very declarative statement that is true. It's reality. It was proven, is that for 4 years, there were no new wars in this country. Now, are there a number of other factors involved in that? Absolutely. But you have to speak clearly and with a decisive statement to get anything across to the American public, because there's just not that depth of thought or process or looking into the situation. Therefore, he was effective, I believe, in communicating that over and over and over, which again, did not in any way was taken out of context. He was able to put us in a position of strength and put us in a position of respect from the rest of the world, to where things stayed peaceful for 4 years. I don't think that was a coincidence. Do I think that it's impossible for Donald Trump to be president and there not to be new wars across the country or across the world? Of course not. But there is a definite correlation to that. So the NATO situation he'll have to deal with, in addition to what you stated about his dealings with NATO, he obviously also pushed to hold them financially accountable and responsible for their share in this partnership, which I found to be just refreshing, that a U.S. president would stand on the world stage and with all the cameras on and point next to a world leader, a nation's leader right next to him, and say, you're going to pay your fair share.
Yeah, and I think people, part of the reason they voted for him is that people do like seeing somebody who's willing to stick up for our country. There's nothing wrong with being willing to take a stand for the United States. We over the years maybe have been taken advantage of because of that spirit you were referring to, which is, being the caretakers. So I'm very encouraged. I'm hopeful. I think we're going to be having a plethora of good changes that we will continue to talk about in the show. But again, thanks for joining the show today, Mark. Appreciate you joining. Mark has a channel, again, Voice of College Football, massive following. You want to check out for the best college football commentary. But I think you might be working more on a project. I don't know if you're pushing it as much yet, but I know you have a channel, The Word by Word, where you talk about, your faith. And I don't know if you talk about politics on there, but you want to put a final plug in for that channel, or are you still working on things?
The Word by Word, it's on YouTube. Hopefully you can find it. We just started it. We did start it about a year plus ago, but have not put the type of content on there that we were envisioning. But we're reading through the Bible word by word. That was the thought. That was the epiphany that I felt that the Lord was sharing with me, that he commanded me to do, was go forth and just read the word and let the word speak for itself. So we're reading through the Bible. We're deep into Exodus right now. And of course, I have my thoughts and my perspective on it as well. But we are letting the word speak for itself. We did have a live stream about a week prior to the election, because I just felt strongly that there need to be clarification of where these two candidates stood on meaningful topics that relate to the church and Christians and conservative Christian values. And one I'll just mention, not that it matters now because he won the election, that I didn't think was addressed anywhere. And that's just the recognition, regardless of Donald Trump's personal relationship with the Lord. I don't know what that is, where it stands, but that he was very definitive in stating that God is God, the God of the Bible. That's who we recognize, and Jesus Christ is Lord. And we are a nation founded on godly biblical values. And he was very strong in that stance throughout the election and throughout his presidency.
Yep, and an undeniable aspect to Saving the Republic, which the show is named after, is the truth in God's word and how it has provided the most successful society with the proper tools for success. So we don't shy away from that here. And Mark, if you want to share that, we'll go ahead and link that in our description of this video so people can follow you there. But again, thanks for joining the show today. Look forward to having you on again.
Thanks, Joe.
Well, if you enjoyed the show today, be sure you subscribe again to Grab Your Gear. We have a weekly long form podcast, also a full documentary still up on the channel, The Union Hustle. You don't want to miss, exposing the fraud in America's unions. And we are live, of course, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So be sure you subscribe, like the video, leave us a comment down below, and we will see you next time. Thank you.